Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about monsters and why they are important and useful and fascinating in young adult literature. And I'd like to start out with telling you about why this book looks the way that it does. Because when people see this book, the first thing they say is, "Wow, what a great cover." And the second thing they say is, "Wow, what a great title." And the title came about because I got mad at my editor at Scarecrow. He said, "Joni, we need you to come up with a title for your book." And I said, okay, and I gave him a whole bunch of titles that were very dignified and scholarly. And he kept saying, no, 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 I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that. So one evening after I'd had 3 or 4 glasses of wine and I was in a really snarky mood, I decided that I would figure out a title that he would have to reject, that it would be so awful that there would be no way he could use it, and therefore he'd want to use one of my titles that I'd already come up with. And I thought about what is one of the most offensive words in the English language. If you just say it, many people are going to be instantly offended. And that word is suck. And so I said, well, how do I fit suck into my title? And I said, vampires suck. Well, what do shapeshifters do? They bite. And zombies, of course, eat. And I had other monsters that killed, and so there was my title. And I sent it off to Stephen, and I waited for an email to come back. And I knew he was going to be really upset and say, "Oh, Joni, we're going to use one of your other titles." And he said, "Joni, it's wonderful. I love it. Publicity loves it. Marketing loves it. That's the title." I said, "Stephen, it was a joke. I can't use that title. It isn't scholarly." And he said, "Forget it. That's the title. And if your tenure committee doesn't like it, I will write them a letter and say, I forced you to use that title." So that's how the title came about. But the idea came about because I have been intrigued by monsters for years, especially since the early 90s when I discovered that my birth father's family came from not just Russia, but also the Ukraine, and finally from the Carpathian Mountain region in Transylvania. And when my cousin told me that, I said, oh, does that mean I'm descended from Dracula? And she just sort of gave me a really bored look. But I firmly believe that's one reason why I'm so intrigued. But we have always had monsters. They emerge from the shadows, and our primitive reptilian brain reacts with fear, recognizing the danger, the threat to our minds and our emotions and our lives. Our stomachs clench and our muscles tighten, and blood rushes from our extremities to the core as we prepare to fight or flight. But while we are afraid and terrified, we are also fascinated and attracted to the monster, peeping around the corner or between our fingers to get just one more glimpse to see if it's safe yet. Have we escaped, or does the creature still lurk, searching, waiting for us to reveal ourselves? Like a train wreck or a freeway pileup, we don't want to look, but we can't make ourselves stop. The monstrous is just as intriguing as it is repellent. Some researchers have postulated that our brains are partially hardwired from birth, and the most widely spread fears or phobias, such as those about snakes or spiders or sea monsters or heights, may be part of that hardwiring, designed specifically to keep our primitive ancestors alive. In other words, there is an actual danger, a snake or a spider or whatever, but the concept of it in the individual's mind is more intense, more fearful, because in the past it actually was dangerous to primitive humans and needed to be avoided at all costs. I was fascinated by an incident that Darwin talked about in his The Descent of Man. And he described his work at the London Zoological Monsters Gardens when he was working with monkeys. Now, monkeys are instinctively afraid of snakes, and Darwin wanted to find out what a monkey would do if confronted with a snake. So he took a snake, had it killed and stuffed, and it was a fairly large snake, and he put it in the monkey cage. And the monkeys avoided it. They were terrified of it. And they never got used to it, even though they had gotten used to other stuffed dead animals. And then he decided to see what would happen when the monkeys were confronted with a real snake. And so he took a live snake and he put it in a bag and then set the bag upright in the monkey cage. And the monkeys would come over one by one, and they would look over the top of the bag. They would see the snake, they would get scared, and they would run away. But they didn't do that just once. Each of the monkeys did it over and over and over. They were fascinated by what they feared. It's kind of like that snake pit scene in that Indiana Jones movie that I watched between my fingers for probably the first 4 or 5 times I watched the movie. I just couldn't actually look at it. And this isn't a reaction that we just have to supernatural monsters. We have the same reaction to real monsters as well. They fascinate us, but we fear them and we recognize their danger. And books and movies let us step into their world for a while to see how close we can get to them without being caught. And who hasn't looked up from a scary story to see the flicker of a shadow, the creak of the floor in the hall, and wondered if maybe the monster had escaped the pages? The popularity of monsters ebbs and flows, and an intriguing question is why those shifts take place and how they affect the population as a whole. Stephen King notes that horror films and novels have always been popular, but they're more popular in times of serious economic or political strain and when there's lots of free-floating anxiety around, and the books and films seem to reflect that anxiety. There's a Columbia professor, Stephen Asma, who wrote a book called On Monsters, who agrees with King. When we're facing a crisis, the popularity of monsters increases. They serve to distract us from current events and let us release some of the pressures of life, giving us a time out. And today, of course, there's no shortage of stresses: shootings, bombs, terrorists, wars on many fronts, and also the economic crisis. The world has become a very dangerous place, and so it is more increasingly populated with dangerous creatures. The vampires came first. They're always the most popular monster. And then there were werewolves and other kinds of shifters, witches, fallen angels, evil fairies. Reading about them, seeing them, and the destruction that they can create makes our own lives and the problems that we have to deal with seem not so overwhelming after all. And they give us a break from reality when it gets too hard to handle. And as long as the world is a dangerous place, we'll need those dangerous creatures to help us forget it. We're intrigued by what we fear most. We want to explore what is forbidden, poke a stick at the monster and see if it'll react. The horror story is a chance to examine what goes on behind closed doors, because what does go on behind closed doors is infinitely tantalizing, and we are curious about it. We also want to gain control of our fears, be able to shove them into the light and examine them carefully and see what they really mean. Horror is a cyclic thing, popular when times are hard and less popular when there are fewer stressors. Children today are brought up in what could be called a culture of fear, taught that there are dangerous people out there capable of harming them, kidnapping them, or killing them, and they should trust no one. And by the time they become teenagers, it's an excellent chance that they've either experienced something truly evil, someone truly evil, or have a friend who has done so. So yes, it's important to tell our children and teenagers that the world is a dangerous place. But they also need to be taught to defend themselves, how to evaluate risk and danger. If they aren't taught how to defend themselves, if they aren't allowed to experience danger and know what it is, know how to judge the risks of the danger and how to combat it, they're going to be ignorant and at the mercy of the monsters that they encounter in the real world. In 2009, a high school teacher asked her English class to complete the phrase, "If you had to choose one word, how would you complete the phrase, 'This is the age of'?" And one boy's response was, "This is the age of fear." Asked to explain, he talked about 9/11 and increased security. Another student talked about fears about child safety, teen drivers, sexual predators, criminals. And teachers, when the teacher asked if any other students in the class had the same kinds of fears, many of the students raised their hands. We think that we're protecting our students, but we're not. Their technology gives them access to people and information all over the world in just seconds, and they both talk and read. They know what is going on in far more detail than the generations previous, and they don't just know that the world is a scary place. They know why. It's important to teach them how to confront and ultimately how to defeat the monsters in their lives, and also how to make use of those monsters as well. Because monsters can be useful. They teach us about our instinctive responses to menace or danger, and they teach us that from a perspective that's safe, from within the confines of a story. We identify with the victims in the story, telling them what to do or what not to do, asking ourselves what we would do in their place inside the story. What weapon would I use? If I heard something in the basement, would I go down there or would I stay upstairs? Would I run away or would I stand and fight? What would I be willing to do to ensure my safety? And what kind of a person does that make me? In a story, we can learn about the monsters, and while they are scary and overwhelming, they can eventually be confronted and tamed, so we and our loved ones are safe from danger. Remember, in Where the Wild Things Are, Max came home, and his supper was waiting for him, and it was still hot. Monsters can also contribute to the growth of the imagination and encourage us to confront our fears. They frighten us, but they're essential in helping us face the challenges of life. A rich imaginative life allows us to experiment with ideas and images, and creative mental play allows us to project our fears and anxieties onto the monsters, who are then conquered and killed. We can then take these lessons back to reality and put them into action. Monsters can also teach us about our own concept of morality based on how we relate to the monsters. Do we play the good guy or the bad guy, the black hat or the white hat? Do we act with or without honor? We learn who we are and what we hold valuable based on our responses to challenges, whether they are real challenges or imagined ones. And there's no doubt that our monsters will always be with us. And that is certainly to our benefit because that protects us from those who would attack us. They allow us to create virtual stories in our minds and practice how to confront the problems and the situations that we all must deal with. As Asma said, as long as there are real enemies in the world, there will be useful, dramatic versions of them in our heads. Great horror fiction also shows us ourselves. Writers drag our fears out of the shadows and force us to look at them and to see who we are, the parts of ourselves that we too conveniently forget to consider. They don't just scare us, they haunt us, they disturb us, and they make us think about the story and our part in it in different ways. We go down the dark corridor of the story. We confront the monsters on their own turf. We see what has been too horrible to contemplate, and then we leave. The story is over. We have looked the monster in the eye, and we have survived. But even though the monsters stay with us, they change over the years. Every society determines the monsters that that society has. What frightened us generations ago is no longer scary. And many YA authors have tweaked their monsters in different ways so that they reflect the mores and the ethics of our current society. They live at the edges of our world, at the boundaries and the borderlines. And they give us sort of a standard to measure ourselves by. Here is the human world, here is the fantastical or the horrible. And while you may stay on the borderlines, as the monsters do, each with a foot on each side, just as adolescents straddle the boundary between childhood and adulthood, that's where we meet them, that's where we go, that's their turf. And we can examine, we can go back and forth until we're comfortable being on either one side or the other. And that's when adolescents finally achieve adulthood. Confronting a monster is safer and easier when it takes place within a story. It's not really likely we're going to meet vampires and zombies and werewolves in real life, but our response to them in stories helps us shape our thoughts and actions when we're confronted with a real monster in our own lives. A monster that is all too real, whose human exterior hides the evil and toxic interior. A human monster who can attack and damage our bodies, our thoughts, and our emotions. Monster stories inoculate us against vulnerability and teach us how to be heroes. If we are to be those heroes in real life, we have to first find them in our own imaginations, because our imaginations determine what our reality will be. Imagining that we will be successful when facing a terrible, frightening, unstoppable monster can give us clues about how to confront a monster in our real lives. Imagining ourselves as powerful and strong, imagining what we'll do when we're confronted by the monster, will allow us to easily do those same kinds of things and think those same kinds of thoughts in real life. If you give in to fears and imagine that the monster is the winner, the victor, that is no doubt what will happen in real life. Because in our imagination, we prepare ourselves for our futures and our future conflicts. It doesn't really matter if the monster is supernatural or human. Both can be confronted and sometimes even conquered between the pages of a book, in a movie, or on a TV screen. In a story, no matter how it's told, the monster isn't able to trap us. We are in control. We can always slam shut the cover, get up and change the channel, walk out of the theater or out of the room when the monster or the action gets too real for comfort. And when our courage is restored, we can come back to our examination of that monster and that situation. The monster is unable to trap us. We are in control and can always walk away. So we can get as close to the monster as we want to and still stay safe, getting closer and closer by page or scene by scene, and then suddenly, when it's too much, let go and go away. It's a very safe position to come from. It's important to remember that G.K. Chesterton quote, "Fairy tales do not tell children that monsters exist. Children know that they exist. Fairy tales tell children that monsters can be conquered." And I've rephrased that a little bit for this book. Teens know that monsters exist. Our teen lit with monsters in it explains how monsters can be killed. But why are young adults so fascinated with monsters? Because perhaps they live in the same kind of space, just as I said a minute ago, where all of the various supernatural monsters live. Monsters have a duality of character, just like teenagers do. They're part monster, they're part from the unreal world, and they're part human, the part of them that lets us identify with the monster. And teenagers exist between the boundaries of childhood and adulthood. So they know how to identify with monsters that are part human and part monster. Teenagers are all about coming of age, about subversion and transistence and resistance, alienation, the awareness of youth and beauty as transitory states. They're young enough to enjoy youth, but at least some of them are also old enough to grasp the inevitability of its going, conscious that they won't always have the pleasures and the benefits of youth. Books about monsters help teens survive the culture of fear that exists in our world by showing them how to understand the monsters, how to challenge them, how to defeat them, and how to disarm them. To the teens who are increasingly alienated from adult culture, forced to learn on their own how to survive, these books reveal secrets that are increasingly valuable and frighteningly necessary. Thank you.